Land of the Dragon. The history of China began about 2,000 years before Rome was founded. But many centuries before that, the black-haired people, as the Chinese called themselves, must have begun to till the fertile young soil along the Hang-Ho, the Yellow River. Then, like all the other early people, they had felt the world about them to be full of unseen spirits. In the great winding river, whose water gave life to their fields, there seemed to be a friendly dragon with a winding tail, a helpful spirit, except when he was angry. Then he lashed about. The water rose, flooding the fields, and swept away the tiny huts. In the shape of clouds gathering in the summer sky, the Chinese farmer, looking up, could see another dragon, the good sky dragon, who sent the gentle summer rain. Against the sky, under the jagged outline of the mountains, could easily be seen the shape of still another dragon, which slept beneath the earth, guarding its riches. And so the dragon, which represented to the Chinese the life and the fertility of their land, came to be the symbol of China. To the question of who had made the world and how it had been created, these early people answered Panku. When all was confusion and disorder, Panku, a mighty being, had lifted up the heavens, holding the sun in one hand and the moon in the other. He had put them into place. Then he had spread out the earth like a carpet and lain down to die. His head had formed the mountains, his bones the rocks, his flesh the soil. His blood made rivers and streams. His breath was the wind, and in thunder could be heard his voice. Centuries passed. The early myth about Panku no longer satisfied the sages or wise men of ancient China. Looking about them, they saw that everything in the world seemed to have its opposites. There was a light and darkness, heat and cold, giving and taking, man and woman, birth and death, good and evil. In that lay the secret of creation, they said. Two forces acting upon each other made up the universe. By a circular symbol, half black, half white, they showed how the two forces, yang and yin, fitted together and made a perfect whole. Yang was all that was light and warm and heavenly. It was alive and active. Yin was solid and still, dark, cold, and earthy. In man, however, yang and yin were also blended together. From yang came man's mind and spirit, and when he died, they would return again to the heavenly yang. His passions and vices came from yin, and when he died, would return to the dark earth. Following this teaching, the people learned to worship and offer sacrifices to the departed spirits of their ancestors and pray to them for help. They also offered sacrifices to the spirits of earth and all spirits, good and bad, to be on the safe side. Very early, at least 1,000 years before Rome was founded, under one of the first kings, the Chinese had perfected a system of picture writing. And in your book, you'll see signs that your teacher will have to show you these signs, like yin and yang, and then the ones I'm going to go through now. You need to probably compare those when she shows you the pictures. This was the picture word for mountains. This was for the river. And this was the symbol for heaven. There were many spirits in the world, but over and above them all, the Chinese believed there was one great spirit of goodness. They called it heaven, or Ting. Tien, I think is how it's pronounced. The king was the son of heaven, and through him heaven's will was to be carried out on earth. No ordinary person would presume to make sacrifice directly to heaven. That was the duty and the right of the king alone. He alone could claim heaven as his ancestor. This is the Chinese symbol for the sun. At midnight on the 21st of December, the shortest day of the year, when the sun seemed to stand still, the king, clad in blue, the color of the sky, made his great sacrifice to heaven. In the yearly return of the sun, in the regular movements of the planets, in the dignified and orderly return of the seasons, the Chinese felt and recognized the divine order governing the universe. They spoke of it as Tao, or the way of heaven. If men would live in harmony with the great way of heaven, said the ancient sages, all would be well upon the earth. To do that, man must use the 5 virtues: kindness, good manners, knowledge, uprightness, honor. To properly use the 5 virtues, a man must know and practice the 5 loyalties, which taught him the right behavior towards every person and everything on every occasion. This right behavior the Chinese called the Lu, the lie. Such was the teaching of the ancient wise men of China. Nevertheless, to say, it was not always lived up to as the centuries passed. Tizu is the Chinese word for teacher or philosopher. Much later, about the time that Zoroaster taught in Persia and just before Socrates and Plato lived in Athens, 2 great teachers or philosophers also lived and taught in China. Lao Tzu, the old philosopher, and Kung Fu Tzu, whose name people of the West would pronounce Confucius, that's much easier. By that time, China had grown into the feudal state, divided into many walled towns and small districts, filmed only by feudal lords, always at war with one another. The strongest, the ones who ruled over the most of these lesser rulers, were the kings of a dynasty known as Chao. Luoyang in Setsu Province was their capital. There, as state historian and keeper of the secret archives, lived an old philosopher, Lao Tzu, as it is also spelled. Lao Tzu taught of Tao as the way of life. There is a thing, said Lao Tzu in his quiet voice, that existed before heaven and earth, cannot be seen nor heard, yet it is everywhere. It is the life of all things. It is quiet, yet there is nothing that it does not do. I call it Tao. If princes and kings would keep to it, all things of themselves would be right. A man who understands Tao thinks of all the people as himself. He gives, and the more he gives to others, the more he has for himself. He treats the good with goodness and the bad with goodness, bad also with goodness, and returns love for great hatred. He does not force his power upon others, nor contend with arms. The strength of his goodness is like that of water. Nothing is so yielding as water, yet it can wear away the hardest stone. Thus can the gentle overcome the strong, and he who fights with love will win the battle. Let us have sound knowledge to walk on the great way. Lao Tzu was about 50 years old when, to the eastward in the province of Shantung, Confucius was born, the youngest of 11 children. Though his father died when he was 3, and as a child he had to work hard, he was given, nevertheless, a good education. Confucius loved to study the ancient Chinese books and wisdom of the sages. When he was about 19, he opened a private school himself, which became so popular that his pupils soon numbered 3,000. History, music, sciences, government, and rules of good behavior Confucius taught, but nothing about supernatural or mysterious spirits of any kind. If a man's conduct was right, his relation to the unseen spirits would take care of himself. In the year 517 BC, it is said, when Confucius was 34 and Lao Tzu was 87, the younger man journeyed to Luoyang to consult the famous old philosopher. He first inquired as to how certain points of etiquette had been taught by the ancient sages, and was dumbfounded by the answer he received. All that is of no use to you, sir, said Lao Tzu. Goodness was not to be taught by rules and regulations. Pure goodness came from within, not from without. If a man's heart was pure and in harmony with Tao, his conduct in others would naturally be right. Confucius then asked Lao Tzu about Tao, saying that he had read many books but could not understand nor obtain it. And why do you not? Answered Lao Tzu quietly. This is the reason. You do not make room for it in your heart. Confucius left Lao Tzu still bewildered, but with admiration for the beautiful spirit of the older man. Today I saw Lao Tzu, he told his pupils. He is like the dragon. I know that birds fly. I know that fish swim. But as to the dragon, I cannot know how he can bestride the wind and clouds when he rises heavenward. Lao Tzu was sad that men would not accept the way of life. The court of the Chao Emperor at Loyal Gang he saw filled with corruption and evil. High officials grew rich as they robbed the poor. Lao Tzu was old and discouraged with the evil ways of men. One day he left Loyacan and drove away, alone on a water buffalo, out through the last gate in the great wall into the desert and was seen no more. Before he left the city, however, he was met at the gate by the warden who begged him not to depart without leaving some of his wisdom behind. So there in the gatehouse, the old philosopher wrote a book of 5,000 words containing 81 of his sayings. It is known as the Tao Te Ching, Ching meaning text, Tao, the way of heaven, and Te, the good life for men. Confucius had then become chief justice of his state, which he properly put into such good order that the envious ruler of the neighboring state plotted to discredit him and succeeded so well that Confucius was obliged to resign. Then for many years he traveled from state to state with his pupils, teaching good morals. The last year of his life he spent gathering together all the wisdom of the ancient sages into 5 texts, or Qing. In centuries following, his pupils wrote 4 more books called Shu, about the sayings of the master himself. These 9 books became the canon of China. The heart of his teaching, the best-known saying of Confucius, is one upon which all great teachers of every land agree. When he was about 19, he was called upon to settle a dispute between some herdsmen who could not understand the fine points of the law. Confucius gave them this simple rule to go by: do not do to others what you would not have them do to you. More than 500 years have now passed. In these days of Caesar Augustus, since Lao Tzu and Kung Fu Tzu had lived and taught in China. And since then, what has happened? The teaching of Lao Tzu, so pure and simple that it seemed a mystery, difficult to understand, had been seized upon and degraded into religion of Taoism, which was exactly the opposite of Lao Tzu had taught. It was a mixture of cheap magic tricks, ignorant superstition, spiritual worship, and alchemy. A Taoist leader had been established whose chief duty seemed to be to take money from the ignorant in exchange for charms against evil spirits. And in the next century, a Taoist professor would be trying to manufacture pills that would make people immoral. The teaching of Confucius, being exact rules of behavior easily understood and not so easily changed, had become the rule of life in China. That was good, for they taught self-control, order, and honest living. But at the same time, those hard and fast rules, the worship of ancestors in the past, discouraged change and growth. Thus, China, which had been for thousands of years a leader in civilization, was eventually to fall behind. But that was far in the future. In this year, 1 BC, China was one of the 2 great empires in the world. And now, by the way of the old Silk Road, connecting those 2 empires, another religion, one from a foreign land, was finding its way into China. It was coming from India.